Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week it's time to get back into the ongoing saga of everyone's favorite undead resurrected superhero with Spawn number 43. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in February of 1996, we get one of the more iconic covers in the first 50 issues of Spawn, where we've got Spawn jumping through the sky right in front of the moon as the backdrop with his cape just outstretched, a bunch of bats flying forward. This cover was also featured in the McFarlane Toys classic cover figure line. And if I'm being quite honest, it's one of, if not my favorite figures from the classic covers line. It looks amazing. There was so much thought put into the design of it. The way that Spawn is just jumping with the cape all outstretched. They had to make some modifications, obviously, to make this work in a three-dimensional form. But for the most part, they really kind of nailed it, and it looks beautiful, in my opinion. Story, Todd McFarlane. Pencils, Greg Capullo. Inks, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Brian Haberlin. Dan Kemp. And a special thanks to Danny Meeke. We see that the story starts off with Sam Burke trying his best to get ready for work as he's being picked up by Twitch Williams. Unfortunately, Sam, as is so often the case, is running very late, and he realizes that this is not going to bode well, as he promised Twitch that he was not going to be late again, as we see him shaving, brushing his teeth, using the restroom, trying to down a donut and a mug of coffee, and trying to make his way out of the bathroom, realizing that he's got toilet paper trailing along with him. And we can see that Sam's life is rather disheveled, as his appearance would suggest. We then see Twitch pull up outside and honk the horn, kind of angry that Sam is not already out on the stoop waiting for him. He then leads his head out the window and says, "Come on, sir, get the lead out." At this point, Sam realizes that he's once again failed to make good on his promise to be on time for once, as we see him quickly trying to get all of his clothes on and figure out a lie that he can give to Twitch. As he walks out the door, he tells him that he was working on a really important case and actually got hung up on a phone call that pertained to the case. You know how it is, right? And Twitch, of course, doesn't buy this at all, as he makes the joke, was that phone call perhaps to a 1-900 number? Sam smiles as he realizes his fly is unzipped and says, "Okay, you got me. I'm late. Sorry. I'll try to do better next time." As they make their way to the police precinct, they begin to talk once again about the investigation they're running into Chief Banks and how they're trying to make sure they can connect all the dots to show that he was involved in making sure that Billy Kincaid was on the path to murder the senator's daughter, which ultimately led to his arrest. Sam starts to ask a few questions, and Twitch tells him the things he's found, notably that all of the money that Banks was receiving was being laundered into an account at the Chase Bank, and that most of this money seemed to be coming from a lot of different politicians on different levels throughout the city and in the federal government. And Sam realizes that this is because these people were putting quote-unquote friends of theirs into important positions, such as a police chief. This is where Twitch says, yeah, that's exactly what was going on. Unfortunately, we gave all of the files that prove this to Internal Affairs, and they swept the whole thing under the rug. And at this point, the two men realize that if this is the case, that means that the both of them are totally vulnerable at this point, because this goes so far up the ladder that they don't have any higher level authority that they can really turn it into, because all of that higher level authority is officially compromised. The two men spend the rest of their commute in utter silence as they both realize they're sitting on a time bomb. Unfortunately, what they didn't realize was that this time bomb has been ticking for quite a while, and it's about to go boom. As they pull up to the precinct and try to park in the police lot, they're informed by the attendant, Joe, that their permit's been revoked. This, of course, throws Sam into a rage as he demands to know what the heck is going on and tells Joe to move out of the way so they can sort this out. However, another officer appears from behind who's much larger and not quite as friendly or as understanding about this situation as Joe is, and tells the two that they're going to have to find somewhere else to park and that he's not letting them into the lot. Joe asks where they can go, and the other officer says, I don't care where they go, but it's not going to be in this lot. Unfortunately for Sam and Twitch, that meant that they had to park 25 blocks away and then walk all the way back to the precinct. And the two of them are rather upset. They've been dealing with freezing weather conditions, and Sam is absolutely about to explode, as he even snaps at Twitch at one point, telling him to shut the hell up when Twitch tries to offer words of encouragement. And unfortunately, they also don't notice that everyone else in the precinct seems to be just kind of leering and watching, as they seem to know something that the two of them don't. As they enter their office, Sam is shocked when he sees a complete stranger going through his files, and he yells at him, stating, "Who are you? What are you doing? Who told you could do this with my files?" And at this point, the two men are surprised when a familiar voice from behind says, "I did." The men then turn around to see Chief Banks standing on the other side of the room with a large grin on his face, as he gloats and states, "I've decided today is the last day for you two gentlemen." He then tells them that he's been waiting quite some time, and that from the moment that they brought internal affairs down to his office, he's been planning this, and he believes that enough time has passed so that this won't look like revenge, which it absolutely is. He then tells the men, "I told you I was going to be very patient." He then starts to gloat over Sam's shoulder, stating that the tap into his phone records was very sloppily done, even for Sam. To which Sam replies, "Bite me." He then walks over to Twitch and starts to gloat over him, stating, "I've been waiting a long time to do this, and now I've brought internal affairs down on you, showing that a large stack of papers I've accumulated will prove that you two have been engaging in a lot of unauthorized investigations." He then says, "I promised your day would come. Now what do you have to say?" At this point, Twitch spins around and points his finger directly at the chief's forehead and says, "Bam, you're dead. We might be going down, but we're taking you with us." As the two men exit the office, Banks starts to scream at them, stating, "How dare you? I'm taking everything, your pension, your health insurance, all of it." Later on in the evening, the two men are at a diner, as Twitch has calmed down a bit and is coming to the realization that he's no longer employed, and wonders how he's going to explain this to his wife and children. At this point, Sam is, telling him to keep his chin up and asks him if he wants a bite of his sandwich, but Twitch responds stating, "No, I'm not hungry. Getting fired kind of takes away my appetite." Once again, Sam tells him to stop being so glum, and even starts to ask him, "Why do you think I wasn't angry at Chief Banks?" It's because we have everything we need to take him down. We've got the file plus the new ones, and there's enough information that if we go public with it, he's going down. He then reminds Twitch of the contact that he has at one of the local newspapers, and tells him that all we have to do is contact him and get him to go public with this story in the paper, and everything's going to fall into place for us. Twitch is a little bit reluctant, but he realizes that they don't have any other choices, though he does wonder what will happen when they expose so many public officials in a single article, and if in fact that's going to once again make their lives even tougher. But he also realizes that they've run out of other options, and he decides to go along with Sam's plan and says that he'll try his best. We are then suddenly teleported far away from the streets of New York City to a long abandoned and forgotten forest, where we see a dead tree sitting above a dead corpse. However, this is not just some random dead corpse. This is in fact Spawn, but he looks, like a decaying body, not like his normal self. This is because his body is doing its best to try and heal. And the way that he's doing this is basically adding a very strange twist to the lore of the Spawn story. Essentially, Todd's take on this is that all nocturnal and subterranean creatures are in fact evil. And basically, Spawn's body is putting out a call to these evil creatures to try and get them to come to him. This is because Spawn's power, as we've seen before, is finite, and while he can siphon some power from the costume itself, he can only do that to a limited degree, as the costume only has so much power it can give. So what Spawn is doing in this case is summoning these said evil creatures to him so that he can siphon their evil energy to heal his injured body and try and repair all the damage that was done by Curse when he was dissecting Spawn in his castle. This is done by luring insects and snakes and apparently even wolves, because they live at night, therefore they must be evil. I don't know. This part really kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He brings up some quote. I say that very questionably. He doesn't say where the quote comes from. It is definitely not a biblical quote that I've ever heard of. And the quote is, "God shed his light on the earth in the name of goodness, and those who shun it shall forever remain stained in evil." Again, I'm not aware of that quote coming from the Bible. Maybe it comes from some other source, but if it does, he sure as hell doesn't name it. So I'm very inclined to believe that Todd just made that quote up himself. And I understand the idea that he needed to come up with a way for Spawn to be able to siphon energy to heal his wounds at a faster pace, but this almost seems like a kind of ham-fisted way of doing it, as it doesn't make sense that just because a creature is nocturnal or perhaps subterranean, that it would automatically be evil as a result. As the wolf approaches Spawn, it's stated that there are many names given to it: hatred, sin, but what's more important is that it's just evil, plain and simple, and its bond is unbreakable. The wolf then begins to prey upon Spawn's mind, which I don't know how it's doing that. It's never explained. And this triggers a memory from Spawn's past as Al Simmons to a night of Wanda's birthday when he and Wanda were supposed to go out and have a night on the town, just the two of them. And when he gets home, it's obvious that he's late and also has forgotten the occasion. He then receives a call to go back to the office and immediately has to leave. This throws Wanda into an absolute rage, as she even smashes a full-length mirror after Al leaves the home. She's then sitting alone on a chair with her heels in hand, trying to figure out what she's going to do, sulking. But then she hears a noise in the bedroom, and she makes her way to it to find that there's actually a brand new puppy with a happy birthday card sitting right next to him. At this point, Al jumps out from behind the shower curtain, fully dressed for a night on the town with a dozen roses for his beautiful wife. This, of course, makes Wanda elated, and Al remembers that, this was a result of him being late so many times, missing so many special occasions, and figuring a way that he could use this to his advantage, as the call itself was fake, and he used the opportunity to sneak over to the neighbor's house, change very quickly, and then sneak back into the house with the puppy, and then hide in the shower. Wanda is super excited and incredibly happy, but she tells Al that they can't just leave this young puppy alone, just in a brand new home, so they need to just stay in with it. So the two of them decide to hop in the bath, have a little fun, and spend several hours making love, and then curl up and go to sleep in bed with the puppy at their feet. And Al remembers what an amazing night that was, and how much he truly loved his wife, and realizes once again what it is he made his deal with the Mabalja for. Also, can we just point out that Todd is kind of clearly overlooking the fact that wolves are not purely nocturnal animals? They only live some of the time awake at night. They're also awake during the day and hunting during the day, and therefore maybe shouldn't be counted amongst the quote-unquote creatures of the night who are automatically evil because they exist nocturnally. I'm sorry, but this is just like one of those parts of Spawn lore that kind of falls flat for me. I get the idea of what Todd was trying to do here, but I always felt like this was kind of a really just off the wall story point that he made in terms of a way for Spawn to generate energy and power without having to use any of his own. Back in New York City, Sam and Twitch meet up with a reporter by the name of Taylor. At this point, Taylor tells Twitch, look, man, it's going to take me months to be able to go to print with this because it's going to take forever for me to be able to corroborate all of the information you've just given me. However, Twitch states, well, I can expedite that process a bit as he hands over the folder with all of the information about Kincaid and everyone else that's in line with the corruption of Chief Banks and the police department. Taylor takes a look at it and Twitch tells him, look, this has everything. Banks, his boys, and a few special friends. But Taylor is still rather reluctant as he states, look, Twitch, you've always been straight with me, but going up against the CIA is generally a terrible decision that ends badly for everyone who's ever attempted it. I've seen this before. At this point, Sam is becoming impatient and he states, fine, if you don't want to do it, we'll take it somewhere else. I'm sure there's someone at the Post who would be more than willing to print this story. Twitch once again says, look, Taylor, I understand that this is going to be tough, but I'd really appreciate it if you could help us out. He then starts to take the file back and tells him, look, I get it. I've been scared before in my life too. I'm not going to pressure you into doing something that you don't think you can handle. However, Taylor actually decides to take him up on the challenge and says, look, I can't promise you anything, but I'll do my best. Twitch tells him, great. And Sam looks over at Twitch and then you realize that they've basically been playing good cop, bad cop. As Sam states, yeah, the old guilt trip works every time, doesn't it, buddy? Meanwhile, back in the forest, more evil creatures of the night have shown up to lend their evil energy to Spawn and allow him to heal. Creatures like bats and also snakes, which exist just as much during the day, if not more so, given that they have to bask in the sun to survive. Owls, and even a bear shows up because, bears aren't roaming around during the day at all. And Spawn is able to heal himself in what admittedly is a super cool full-page splash of Spawn jumping to his feet, cape billowing out, all these animals around with their red glowing eyes on the backdrop of the moon behind them on what is a mostly black and white image, which really makes Spawn stand out with his red cape. It is super cool looking, and the only problem I have is that the idea of this whole premise kind of falls flat. I can give Todd a little bit of credit to the idea that, in theory, Spawn being able to siphon evil energy from creatures of the night who are conduits of said evil energy to heal himself would kind of make sense if you're willing to, really invest in the Spawn universe as it exists up until this point, were it not for the fact that Spawn typically spends most of his time in the alleyways of New York City, surrounded by billions of cockroaches and hundreds of millions of rats, who are all nocturnal creatures that would have essentially been able to give him all of their evil energy so that he could have healed at any time. Remember that time that Curse showed up to New York and blasted a hole through Spawn's chest with his laser cannon arm, and Spawn just never healed it because he didn't want to waste his valuable energy to heal the giant gaping hole through his torso? He didn't need to. He could have just been siphoning that energy from all the roaches and rats and over time been able to heal it, but he never did, even though he theoretically had this ability the entire time. Do you understand why this is not great storytelling for this part of Spawn's lore and powers and abilities? If this is something he could have been doing from the start, why wasn't he? Why are we only learning about it at this point? It just, I don't know, man. This kind of stuff just bugs me. I get you want to keep introducing us to new abilities that Spawn has, but I also believe it really needs to make more sense than it does in this issue. Meanwhile, back in New York City at the Daily Tribune, the paper which Taylor works at, Taylor is engaged in a very serious discussion with his editor and the attorney for the paper. Taylor has been doing his best to convince and reassure the attorney that everything in the file is 100% legit. He's double checked all of it. And the paper will in no way be sued for libel or slander if they run this story. Taylor's editor seems to agree, as he even states that a story like this is exactly what the paper needs to get back on track, as they've been struggling financially for some time now, and this would be a perfect way to up their subscription base. He then tells Taylor that he needs to make a few phone calls of his own just to verify a few bits of information that are in this folder. And Taylor is a little reluctant, but his editor states, look, if I'm going to stick my neck out on this one, I've got to make sure that everything is legit, every T is crossed, and every I is dotted. However, the phone calls that he makes trigger a series of events through several different conduits that eventually get all the way back up the chain to Jason Wynn. His subordinate asks Wynn exactly what he wants him to do, and Wynn tells him that at this point they're throwing Chief Banks under the bus, and that he's supposed to use code word meltdown, contact everyone involved, and make sure that everything leads back exclusively to Chief Banks. He then informs him that he's supposed to also contact their connection at the paper and make sure that the story they run only implicates Banks and no one else that's in the files. 2 days later, back at the 12th precinct, Chief Banks is having a very uncomfortable discussion with one of his subordinates, who tells him that he is in fact a sacrificial lamb, and that every one of his connections that he has tried to call have all been reportedly out of their offices or on vacation, and that Banks is being railroaded to protect all of them. Banks refuses to admit this and picks up the phone trying to make calls to all of these contacts himself, when he is hitting roadblock after roadblock, as each time he's told that, oh, they're out, they're not here, blah, blah, blah. And Banks becomes more and more infuriated, stating, I don't care if they're not there. I want you to get me aligned to where they are. I need to talk to these people. However, he's never able to make any contact with any of these people, as they've all been instructed by Wynn to completely ignore Banks. And the next day, the Daily Tribune does in fact run the story that connects Chief Banks to Billy Kincaid and the murder of the senator's daughter. As day breaks, the papers hit the newsstands, and suddenly the entire city is made aware of what Banks did. He realizes that the jig is up and that he's been sold down the river, as it were. His secretary pokes her head in, stating, your wife is on the phone, she's crying. Please, sir, will you just talk to her? But he orders her to leave and tells her and everyone else to leave him alone as he smokes a cigarette and drinks some whiskey. He then thinks of the two men that he always knew he could count on that would never turn their backs on him, Al Gilly and Bob Camonico. However, he knows that there are others who knew this too, as he was informed through an anonymous phone call that these two men were lost at sea when their boat capsized in the Caribbean during a recent vacation. He knows that their bodies will never be found and that the only two men who could have helped him are no longer there. As the press gets word of what's happened, news reports start to come out on CNN, the E! Network, and whatever the hell network Thurston Burns happens to be working for this week. And most of it is pretty straightforward, just reiterating what was printed in the paper. However, our old pal Thurston, firebrand and conspiracy theorist that he is the one guy who actually fully kind of understands exactly what's going on, as he connects the dots and states, Chief Banks, who used to be Sheriff Banks, who used to work for a private security company that was connected to the senator, and we're all just supposed to believe that he had the senator's daughter killed by old kitty killer Kincaid because of a personal grief he had with him, and that this was all just, hidden right underneath our noses, when in fact the only way that this could have actually worked was with CIA involvement. But of course, they can't directly control the police because that would be illegal, right? It's kind of crazy how he's the one person who understands, no, this goes way deeper than just what we're being told, and that the CIA had to be involved in this. And nobody else seems to pick up on this or wants to report on it. And it's always made out to be that Thurston's rather crazy, and in some aspects he probably is, but he's kind of right on the money with this one. Chief Banks continues to ignore phone calls, both from the mayor, the commissioner, and even the governor, and he eventually drops his glass on the floor, allowing it to shatter, and then approaches the window to look down to the street below, noticing the large gathering of news media and a small gathering of federal officers who are approaching the police precinct. One of them noticeably has a subpoena in his hand, and a reporter starts to give her report to the camera, stating that while the feds didn't give her a lot of answers, they did state that Chief Banks has not been formally charged as of yet. We then see Sam and Twitch standing off to the side as Sam states, "I hope they fry this bugger." Twitch agrees, but also makes note of the fact that the story didn't implicate anyone other than Chief Banks, and that something had to have gone wrong, as their files should have implicated dozens of people that were on many different levels of city and federal government, implicating them in this crime. As the feds make their way through the building, some of the other officers start to jeer at them, stating, why don't you guys go after some bad guys instead of one of the, one of the fellow officers who's trying to keep the peace? The ones who were remaining loyal to Banks through all of this, despite what they may have read. We then see Banks put out his cigarette as the feds walk up the stairs to his office. Banks then reaches into his desk drawer to pull out his service revolver as the feds approach the door, and we see the barrel of his gun silhouetted against said door. One of the officers states that it's locked, and he tells Banks to open up. There's nowhere for him to go. There's nowhere for him to run. However, there is one place he can go. And on the final page of the story, we simply get a full black page with the word blam and a blood spatter, as Chief Banks seems to have decided to take himself out rather than face the music. And then we see a small bit of text that says, "Another black rose blooms in hell tonight." We then get to image info, which I'm not going to get into because everything in this is horrifically outdated because it was printed 30 years ago. It's just upcoming comic books that were on their way down the pike, again, 30 years ago, which is why I'm not getting into it. But, it's cool that it's here. I just wish it wasn't so prevalent in like every issue, so I didn't have to keep giving this same spiel in every episode. We then get to the spawning ground where readers could submit their letters and potentially have them printed and answered by Todd McFarlane. There's a few interesting ones this month. One of them is being a little bit critical of the bi-weekly schedule that Todd was releasing Spawn issues on at this point in time, and stating how it felt that the quality of the books had kind of dropped off a little bit as a result. And Todd actually admits to him that he's also not really into the bi-weekly schedule, and it wasn't working out the way he had hoped. So after issue 50, he was going to be going back to a monthly schedule and being able to focus on one really good book a month rather than two kind of good books a month. The next letter is critical of issue number 39 in particular, as the reader seemed to feel that the plot of issue 39 wasn't very good and that it felt like Todd was being a little too on the nose and a little bit too cliche. And Todd's response to that one is kind of weird. Instead of responding directly about the criticisms that the reader had of the book, he somehow, I guess, took it to mean that the guy was being critical of the poor family that was featured in that issue, and kind of goes off on the guy about him being demeaning towards the poor, which he really wasn't. I read the letter. It's really just about him criticizing Todd's writing. And Todd just, I don't know if he doesn't realize that or if he's trying to avoid having to answer for that and instead turns it into this whole like defense of people without means type of thing. It's very odd. The next letter that I found interesting is another one that's quite critical, where a reader talks about how he feels that the stories are kind of all over the place and that they feel like there's not a whole lot of flow, and sometimes it's kind of difficult to follow and keep up with. And in this one, Todd actually agrees with him and, very much addresses his point, stating that, his stories had been rather disjointed as of late, and that it's a result of the fact that he had way too many storylines going at once between a lot of different characters and subplots, and that in doing this, he wasn't able to balance out exactly how to get all of these stories feeling that they had a natural flow to them. And in reality, they don't. A lot of it is kind of difficult to keep up with. The stuff with the Freak, this ongoing storyline that just got wrapped up in this issue with Sam and Twitch. You also have the storyline with Cygor going on, the stuff with Curse. There's so many things happening all at once, along with, the plot about Spawn himself and Mabulja and the Violator. It was way too many different points going on at one time to have a natural flow to it. So it is very refreshing that Todd is willing to admit his mistake and that he needs to have a more centralized story with only maybe one subplot going on at a time rather than like 4 or 5. But I still find it really weird that he was so defensive about issue 39, and defensive in a manner that wasn't even prudent to the letter that was written. Very odd. It was a really odd way to respond to that, and it just didn't sit with me right. We then get a 2-page pinup of Angela, and yes, it's vertical, but I'm not going to fault it because it is a pinup and not part of the main story. This is by a team of Lewis and I think DNL. I don't know who these people are, but I feel like they did a pretty good job with this pinup of Angela. Cool background with the lightning bolt behind her, and she's looking really sexy and dangerous as she should. It's really pretty quality artwork, and I wish I had a better understanding of exactly who did this. Like if there was an actual print of their names down here instead of just their stylized signatures, that would be really nice, but there's not. So if you know who these people are and can tell me in the comments exactly who they are, I'd be happy to know, because right now I'm just kind of guessing. We then reach the end cap where Todd talks about upcoming toys in the McFarlane toy line. Interestingly enough, 3 of the toys featured on this end cap section are all Wetworks, as we see Pilgrim, Dozer 2, and the Blood Queen, along with Frankenstein, which I remember this Frankenstein figure and being kind of confused about him back in the day, just because it's a Frankenstein figure, whatever. And it's weird because it's more of Frankenstein's monster than Frankenstein the scientist, but whatever, it's Todd's toy line. He can do whatever he wants with it, or whatever he wants with it. I did completely forget about this Blood Queen figure, though. She's a unique character to put out from the Wetworks series. And I mean, admittedly, she is kind of like the main villain, but still, it's, very odd. She's not like one of the more action-oriented characters that you would have expected to come out of a toy line from that series. So it is kind of cool that she got made. I'll tell you, I don't know that she sold very well, because I can't recall coming across this figure very often, even to this day, whereas you'll still see a lot of these other McFarlane Toys figures in, conventions or comic book stores, even, 30 years later. There is some interesting points that are brought up, one of which is a reader writing in about Cosmic Angela not having a helmet on the back of her head. And this was actually a paint error that they didn't catch until people started writing in about it. And they had to contact the facility where the toys were being manufactured and tell them that they had to paint the back of Angela's head so that she would have a quote-unquote helmet. So if you have one of the helmetless Cosmic Angela figures, she is maybe one of the rare ones? I don't know. I don't know which one of these figures is more rare, the helmetless or helmeted figure. But either way, there are 2 versions of Cosmic Angela out there. And this is also the issue in which they announce the 13-inch deluxe figures that are going to be coming out, which will retail, at least 30 years ago, for $19.95. And there were some people who were a little bit tentative about this, as they were afraid of, McFarlane producing, even more expensive figures than he was already producing and their ability to find them. But McFarlane tried to, reassure them that they were not going to go above $20 and that they were going to try and produce enough of these so that people would be able to get their hands on them. We then get 2 pages of Spawn Direct. I've talked about this in previous episodes. This was just a place where you could mail away to get Spawn merchandise. It was super cool, but I'm not going to get into any more detail about it here. If you'd like to know my thoughts about it, check out what I've said about this in previous episodes. On the final page of the book, we see an advertisement for the Savage Dragon, number 27. And this is kind of a spoiler for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's about the character Rapture, whose first appearance I have not gotten to in my retrospective look at Savage Dragon as of yet, or at least as of the time I'm recording this video. And it also spoils the fact that she asked Dragon to marry her. What I completely forgot was that this was a mail-away thing where you, the reader, got to decide whether Dragon said yes or no to this proposal. It was kind of a unique idea that Erik Larson would put the fate of his ongoing story in the hands of the readers, but I think it's actually kind of a cool idea. I mean, granted, you're going to have to change how the story goes depending on, which answer wins out, but this is a really unique way to get the reader directly involved in how the story itself plays out and where it's going to go in the future. Now, as I stated, this is kind of a spoiler alert because I'm nowhere near issue number 27 in my Savage Dragon series, but if you'd like to know more about Savage Dragon, you can check out my Savage Dragon playlist, and I promise eventually I will get to this issue and we will find out what the answer is. And on the reverse inside cover, we see the same Cygor figure advertisement that we've seen in several other issues. Still, it was kind of a cool figure for the time, and I still think it has a great look, even if it's not terribly representative of what he looked like in the comic books. And that was Spawn number 43. And overall, I think this is a fantastic issue, except for the parts that actually have Spawn in them. As I stated during this episode, I really believe that the whole crazy siphoning of evil energy from, creatures of the night who are conduits of evil energy to heal himself, in theory, is not the worst idea, but it doesn't make sense the way that Todd presented it in this book, and it doesn't make sense that he would have never ever used this ability ever before in the previous 42 issues, despite how many times he needed to heal himself from horrific wounds. But the rest of the story as a whole is fantastic. This has been building for so many months, over a year at this point, of Sam and Twitch going after, the people that tried to screw them over and bring to light this horrendous amount of corruption that's going on between the CIA and the police of New York City, and this whole back and forth that they've had with Chief Banks over that time period. And I thought this was a really cool way to bring a lot of closure to that, despite the fact that it's only closure to the story that pertains to Banks and not to Jason Wynn or anyone else on the chain of command of corruption. But it was really great the way it was done. And what's going to happen now with Sam and Twitch, that they're no longer part of the police force? Where do they go from here? What happens to the police force now that it's no longer under the charge of a corrupt police chief? And what happens to Jason Wynn now that one of the subordinates that he actually relied on to get things done for him on the street level is no longer in the picture? It's a really interesting way to create a lot of potential branching paths for where Sam and Twitch and Jason Wynn and the entirety of the police force of New York City go from here. And I thought it was done brilliantly. It was really interesting. It was drawn beautifully. And for as long of a buildup as it was to it, I think the payoff was pretty good. But then again, these are just my opinions. You might think that it was executed in a poor manner. You might think that the whole explanation of Spawn being able to siphon evil energy from creatures of the night is a really cool idea and was executed really well. And if that's the case, it's okay because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.